was actually called the hairdresser's car.
I've got to say this, I wouldn't call it beautiful.
A bit romantic.
They're damn good fun cars.
Driving this car today, it's all muscle work.
Robust, masculine, hairy-chested.
It actually gave the car a macho image.
The story of Triumph begins with a young man called Siegfried Beckmann, born of Jewish parents in Germany, came to London in the 1880s to make his fortune. Britain at the time was in the middle of a cycling craze, so logically enough he thought he would move to Coventry, where most cycles were made, and start up in business making cycles. Logically enough he then thought, why don't we turn our cycles into motorcycles? Other people had done this already. And from about 1902, Triumph was in the motorcycling business. After the First World War, Triumph decided to go into cars as well. The original car was the 1020, but the first Triumph to sell in big numbers was a small car called the Super 7. This sold in tens of thousands, and during the 1930s, Triumph started building much smarter, much more sporty cars, very much in competition with Riley and SS Jaguar of the period.
This car is a 1938 Triumph Dolomite Roadster. I think they believed it would sell because it was beautiful. The sort of person who I think would have bought it in those days would not have been a family man. With the best will in the world, it's a two-seater really. And I think they were aiming it for, dare I say, the upwardly mobile person of the day. Which probably didn't exist. Driving this car today, in comparison to modern cars, it's hard going. There's no servo-assisted brakes, there's no powered steering, it's all muscle work. The styling of the grille did create controversy in the motoring press because it was contended that Triumph stole the design from America. Buicks had a not dissimilar grille to this one. I find the appeal of this car is a bit romantic because my doctor, when I was a very, very young child during the Second World War, he had a Dolomite, and I can clearly remember with my mother going to the doctors or passing the surgery on the way to the shops with this Dolomite sitting in the curb. And I was always fascinated by looking through the window, staring at the speedometer at 100 miles an hour, which as a sort of 7 or 8 year old boy was something unimaginable to be able to travel at 100 miles an hour. When I decided to go into the classic car world 10 years ago or so, the first car which really attracted me was going back to my old Dolomite. People like to see something beautiful, don't they? If I pull into a petrol station, invariably someone will come up and say, what is it? How old is it? And always the $64 question, how much is it worth? It's just a pleasure to be able to drive something which, to my mind, is beautiful and usable. The Roadster fits into the pre-war Triumph story as possibly a white elephant. It was brought out to try and rejuvenate a flagging company, but it was probably the death knell of Triumphs, because at £450, I'm sure they lost money on every one they produced, which just hastened the demise of the company, eventually into bankruptcy.
And in the end, the bank said, enough, and sent in a receiver. Into the story now comes a typical 1930s tycoon called Sir John Black. Managing director of Standard, and in the end he bought the remains of Triumph at the end of 1944. Black decided to recreate Triumph really as the upper-class Mark version of the Standard.
Miss Dodo Watts, famous film and stage star, taking delivery of her favourite car, a Standard, of course. So goodbye and good going.
From 1946, when the first post-war Triumphs appeared, they were all what some of us in the business call Standard Triumphs. The Roadster was a pastiche of the pre-war Dolomite Roadster. Sir John Black had seen the way that MG was succeeding so well in export markets, in selling sports cars to America, and thought he would like to do as well himself. First of all, he tried to buy Morgan. Well, that wasn't easy because Morgan was controlled by one man, and Mr. Morgan himself decided not to be taken over. Therefore, Sir John Black went back to his designers and said, "You see the MG, I want a car that's better than this. Design me a sports car to send to America. Oh, and by the way, you've got about 3 or 4 months to do the job." The TR2, as we now know it, was conceived in a hurry during 1952.
The Triumph TR2 sports car leapt into fame over the measured mile on the Belgium-Jabeka highway by covering the distance at an astonishing 124 miles per hour. Ex-racing driver Ken Richardson put the car through its paces for the benefit of the international motoring press, and sports enthusiasts the world over acclaimed the first of a new line of successful Triumphs.
Sir John Black knew exactly what he was doing when he decided to fill that niche, that financial niche, between the Jaguars at the top end and the MGs lower down. Specifically, he wanted to raise the profile of Triumph cars in general.
The TR2 built its reputation by seeming to be totally unbreakable. It could be used in rallies, it could be used in racing, it could be used on the road. It was, in all respects, a bargain.
Early TRs were competing against the new MG, the MGA primarily. Quite different to look at. The MGA was almost all convex curves, whereas the TR was rugged in appearance. It had some rounded contours, a lot of flatness about it. When Harry Webster, who was chief designer at Triumph, came across this young Italian designer, Michelotti, he immediately recognized a rising talent. As a result of this, he was commissioned to design the next body style, which became the TR4 through the 4A and the TR5. This was a much more boxy style. It had vestigial fins. They were popular at the time. I've got to say this, I wouldn't call it beautiful. I own a 4A. I think it's a lovely looking car, but I wouldn't call it beautiful. Strong, rugged, robust, masculine, hairy chested. This is the sort of adjective which TRs tend to attract.
The Triumph TR4A lets you know what a real sports car is all about. Big power, 4-speed stick, disc brakes, bucket seats. You get only one shot at life. Make it a Triumph.
The TR6, which is essentially the TR4A and 5 with a different body, was an attempt to sell what had become a very, very fast sports car. Remember, they were churning out 150 brake horsepower. They were 125 mile an hour cars. They were not as expensive as a Jaguar. They were faster than all the MGs, but they didn't sell the TR5s because they didn't look much different to the slower, earlier 4s and 4As. Michelotti was too busy with work, and so Carman from Germany was commissioned as cheaply as possible to make the same car look different, and he produced a masterpiece, I think, with the TR6. The appeal of TRs essentially is the appeal of most British sports cars. They're damn good fun cars. They are fun to drive. They are fun to own. They look different.
Now, Gwen, yes? This is the Triumph TR6. It does 150 miles an hour and has a petrol injection engine.
I'm looking at a rev counter.
Tachometer, my dear.
Excuse me, but the Triumph 1500 has an 8-light warning system.
We'll take the TR6.
The TR6?
It's not for us.
It's for our little nephew.
Oh, your nephew.
That's him out there.
By the middle of the 1950s, the Triumph name had done so well for Standard that the company had decided to name its next family car Triumph as well. And this was a car that was going to change the face of the company.
It's the most go-anywhere car in its class. Thanks to all-round independent suspension, the wheels soak up the bumps while you soak up the scenery. There's a very quick gear change too.
When the time came to replace the Standard 8 and Standard 10 saloons in the late 1950s, Standard Triumph had a big problem over body supply. In the end, the big decision had to be made to use a separate chassis frame and to use body shells built up from separate sections. But styling the car was difficult. In the end, Technical Chief Harry Webster went out to Italy to see his consultant Giovanni Michelotti and said, if you had a free hand, what shape would you like to see? In an afternoon, Michelotti and Harry Webster between them sketched out the Herald in full size on a drawing board in Turin, and that is the Herald that we see today. Because the body was built in sections, it was also a very versatile design.
This is a Triumph Herald, the only car in its class with the strength and safety of a steel girder chassis. You can buy this chassis as a convertible, an estate car, or as a saloon.
No one else in the business in Britain seemed to be able to achieve this at the time. Harry Webster and his team of engineers soon discovered that they could shorten the wheelbase, and they could also have Michelotti produce a truly beautiful little sports car style on it as well.
Squadron, scramble. 40 bandits approaching 10. Good show.
Like your first love, you never forget your first Spitfire. You not only get a car and a girl, but a piece of history.
So from one good idea, as it were, a whole family of cars for the 1960s was evolved. The Herald was the four-cylinder engine family car. Then there was a short chassis version of this design. The four-cylinder version became the Spitfire, but out of that came the Vitesse, which was basically the same car with a six-cylinder engine squeezed up front under the bonnet. And then logically, by squeezing the six-cylinder engine into the Spitfire style and adding a roof, bingo, the GT6 appears as well.
This is the new Triumph GT6. And if you think it's just another fastback, you're wrong. It's the new fastback that's also a true sports car.
These cars, the Heralds and Spitfires, were technically very advanced. They had all-independent suspension, and they had the most phenomenal turning circle. Not only that, but the whole of the front end, the bonnet, the front wings, the wheel arches, the whole of the front end could be lifted up at once, and that made access for the do-it-yourself man absolutely supreme. No other car in the country could match that.
Easy maintenance was shown by a small boy of about 4 years old in an oil can. having spacious accommodation was shown with a large queue of people about to get in. And so that if you bought a Herald, you bought something that was different and distinctive, but you also bought something where you were going to have fun.
The Herald was the first of the modern triumphs that made this mark so fashionable in the 1960s. So fashionable that it killed off the name Standard from 1963. By that time, Standard Triumph had been taken over by Leyland, where the dominant character was Donald Stokes, and Triumph was very much his favourite mark at the time.
Now, gentlemen, the moment you've all been waiting for.
By this time, Donald Stokes had got big plans for Triumph. One can now see that he had his eye even on matching BMW with new engines and new models to capture what's called the niche market.
This guy is a Triumph Stag, and this particular model is a 1978. It's finished in signal red with black interior. Triumph actually bought a Mercedes 230 SL. They actually took the car to pieces, see how it ticked, see how it was made, and obviously they wanted to base the Stag and try and make it as good a car as that. But unfortunately, due to quality controls, it never was.
There were problems with the engine. It was a major development exercise, and certainly in the first 2 or 3 years, Triumph had great problems in getting that engine reliable. Blown cylinder head gaskets in particular became famous on the car.
Initially, Triumphs gave all their cars code names. These were normally 4-letter code names. The Herald was called a Zobo, the Spitfire was given the name of Bomb, and the 2000 GT from Michelotti was actually called the Stag. Initially, when the car was made, it was a full open-top car, but due to the American safety laws at the time, so they decided to fit a T-bar, which makes it quite an attractive feature of the car. I first got into Stags because I used to do a car cleaning round when I was 12. On the other cars on the car cleaning round, I'd spend about 10 minutes cleaning them. When I actually got to cleaning the Stag, I'd spend about an hour polishing all the chrome, cleaning all the carpets, and I just love the car, just such a lovely shape. And I love the car so much, I always vowed that one day I'd own one. Unfortunately, the car got a very jaded image in the early 70s. In fact, a lot of playboys, a lot of hairdressers actually owned the car, and at one point it was actually called the hairdresser's car. Thankfully, they've all now progressed onto buying four-wheel drives, and hopefully the image has now come down to the fact it's a nice sports car owned by normal people. Not normal. Look at my hair.
In the late 60s and early 70s, a whole series of brochures, including a very important launch brochure on the Stag, were actually storybooks. If you bought a Stag or you looked at a Stag brochure, you went on a glamorous journey from the grey streets through onto the open roads, and finally you finished up in Monaco, Monte Carlo, on the seafront with your yacht. And the GT6, for example, has an Avenger-type story, with a girl going on a spying mission, followed by a man in a bowler hat. They're stopped by various spy thriller-type gendarmes and policemen en route, so that, in a sense, at that time, if you were bought a Triumph, you were also an escapist, somebody who enjoyed adventure and excitement.
Triumph had always been a favoured mark of Lord Stokes, but soon after British Leyland was nationalised in 1975, Lord Stokes stepped down, and before long the whole atmosphere in the company had changed. For the 1970s, British Leyland looked long and hard at the North American market and decided they had to make a car of a totally different character from the TR6. The result was the TR7 with the wedge styling, with the very transatlantic look and character.
Triumph's bold slashing wedge, TR7, at a bold slashing price, $49.95. Triumph TR7, the shape of things to come.
Amongst TR enthusiasts, drivers of TR7s are known as wedgie pilots. We refer to them as wedges, not necessarily disparagingly, but they are radically different. And there's no doubt about it, that the TR7 looked bang up to the minute, it looked quite different. This upset some people, but a lot of people liked it.
This was different from nearly every other model in British Leyland. It had its own body, it had its own factory, and it had its own engine as well. So, as rationalisation proceeded during the 70s, the bean counters, the accountants, kept looking at the projects and saying, is this car making money? Should we really be selling so few of them? It meant that early in the 1980s, the axe fell on the TR7 before it could really make its own reputation. It meant, quite suddenly, that as the 1980s opened, there were no new Triumphs on the market at all. British Leyland had a new boss in Sir Michael Edwards. In 1979-1980, his planners convinced him that he needed a new medium-sized saloon car model. This, as we now know, was found in a cooperation agreement with Honda. So, the last Triumph of all was basically a Honda. It was called the Triumph Acclaim, and it was made from 1981 to 1984. But there is no Triumph enthusiast out there who really looks upon it as a real Triumph, a traditional Triumph. If I knew the secret to what makes a car loved by all its owners, I would patent that secret and make many millions of pounds. All I can say is that people seem to like Triumphs today because they are full of character. They're fun to own, they're sporting, they usually look good as well.